All right, guys. Hey, welcome back to another video. I know it's been a long time, but we're going to get right into it. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the idea of thankfulness. Okay, so we got our 4 points. That's verses 10 and 11. But now, verses 12 and 13, Paul kind of expands upon this idea of giving. And so I want to start in verse 12. And verse 12 really, it gives us an idea of the purpose of giving. So let's read it. For the ministry of this service is not only supplying the needs of the saints, but also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. Okay, so one, Paul lays it out. We give to meet needs. He says there, supplying needs. We give to meet needs. And I think that's something we kind of at first could say, okay, obviously, let's move on. But I think it's something we need to harp on, sit on a little bit, because giving to meet needs, not just giving to give, not just giving simply because, whatever I'm giving, it's the thought that matters. No, I mean, the thought is important and our heart's important, and we'll get to that in a second, but you want to give in a way that actually benefits the other person. It's not about you. It's about God supplying you and us meeting needs. Paul makes it clear here. If you're cold, give them a jacket. If they're hungry, give them food. And you need to have discernment and maybe do a little study, and that could be another video, on what are biblical needs. Because sometimes we have needs, or someone will say, I have a need, and it's really not a need. It's more of an idol, or simply a sin, or maybe like something that maybe a want, at the least. And we need to have discernment to identify what needs are so that we can meet them with our giving. And Paul's like, listen, Church of Jerusalem, they need stuff. Let's meet their needs. But the second reason is to promote an atmosphere of thanksgiving. He says, but also overflowing in many thanksgivings to God. Paul's kind of saying here, when you give, you spark this atmosphere and this environment and this revival of thanksgiving, not to you, but towards God. And again, it goes back to point number 1, God is the sustainer. And then point number 4, since God is the sustainer, he is the one to be given the glory, and he's the one who deserves all the thanksgiving. And so again, when we give, we meet needs, we give for the purpose of meeting needs, but we also give to promote a environment of thanksgiving towards God. Okay, now moving on. Verse 13. Verse 13 really kind of lays out the response to giving. And when Paul kind of explains this, how people should respond to giving, it really encourages me to want to give, and I hope it does the same for you guys. So verse 13. By their approval, that's the receivers, by the receivers' approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission flowing from your confession of the gospel of Christ and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others. Okay, so there's 2 responses. 1, God is glorified. The receiver, acknowledging the act is coming from God, glorifies and gives all thanks to God. And that's a beautiful thing. And we've been really hitting that home, because Paul's really hitting it home here, not me. And then number 2 also gives us an idea of what the motivation behind our giving should be. Notice Paul says here, where does giving come from? From your confession of the gospel of Christ. So 1, our motivation for giving should be, we're motivated by the act of Christ, the giving of Christ, the gospel. God gave his son gave his life for us to meet our ultimate need. And in the same way, we're motivated by that to give in the same manner and to glorify God and want to pursue righteousness, and making it a requirement in our lives to search and pursue that righteousness. And so that's number 2. That's the second response to giving. The second consequence of giving is the gospel is reflected to the world, it is promoted, and it is really it's spread by giving in the same manner as Christ gave himself and God gave his son in the gospel. So again, first response to giving is that God is glorified, and the second response is that the gospel is spread and promoted and reflected. All right, so finally, I just want to real quick, at the end of verse 13, it says that giving should be done generously. And I really think that gives us an idea of the heart of giving. And I think that's something to point out. And then it really if you go back to verse 7, which we didn't read in same chapter in chapter 9, it talks about how giving should be done cheerfully. And if you read that verse, it's like, listen, you need to give generously and you need to give cheerfully, pretty much out of your own free will. Because if you're a stingy giver, that's not properly reflecting the type of giving Christ gave. So when people look, and people can tell that you're being stingy about it. Maybe the person you gave to can't tell, but your children would tell, your friends would tell, whoever you're kind of more honest with, your wife, they're going to be able to tell. And then that's not proper. That's dishonoring God by a Christian who's claiming to give out of reflecting the gospel, out of reflecting Christ, out of acknowledging the fact that God sustains. You're being stingy about it. Like, that makes no sense. That's a terrible example. So little caveat, little clarification there. Be a cheerful giver, be a generous giver. Have your heart be in the right place before you give. So I hope that helps you in your giving. I hope that inspires you and motivates you to be better givers. Feel free in the comment section below to fill me in if on any testimonies, if you get to kind of practice and live this out, because that's, again, this word is no good unless it's put into action. Interpretation is nothing without application. And so I'll be praying for myself and for you guys that we have opportunities to be great givers and to also be very thankful receivers. And so, yeah, that's the end of the video. I'll see you next time. We have everything we need. #Kanye West. Peace out and God bless.